These are the top 10 worst cities to buy a house in America in 2024. If you're a home buyer, you do not want to be buying a house in these cities this year because they're areas that are ridiculously expensive, areas where there's no inventory on the market, and where home prices are very overvalued and could decline into the future. And I personally fear that there's lots of people who are looking to buy houses in these areas right now who don't know what's coming. They don't know what they're up against. So in this video, I'm going to arm you with the data so you guys can avoid making a big mistake in buying in these cities this year. Starting with number 10, Los Angeles. Los Angeles is one of the most expensive housing markets in America, with a typical home value of over $900,000. That's over 3 times the US average, with things especially bad down in Orange County, where even the foreclosures are going to run you over $1 million. Price levels which are just not sustainable, everyone. Home prices in Orange County, they're about 25% overvalued, meaning that prices could be going down into the future, because historically both Orange County and Los Angeles have gotten hit hard by housing downturns in the past, with prices crashing 35% in the downturn from 2007 to 2012 and by 25% in the downturn in the early 90s. However, in order to see substantial price declines in Southern California, we're going to need to see more inventory hit the market. Now, our number 9 worst city to buy a house in 2024 is nowhere near California. It's on the complete other side of the country, where home prices, they've almost doubled over the last 7 years. You got to be very careful purchasing in Manchester, New Hampshire, because this is a location that has boomed since the pandemic hit. Lots of people moved from Boston up to Manchester when they realized they could work from home and pay about 30% cheaper for a house, something that ultimately caused a big housing bubble to develop in New Hampshire. And unfortunately, now we're in a situation where the locals can no longer afford the houses, which signifies that we could see a downturn coming into the future. However, to see that, once again, we're going to need to see the inventory and homes for sale increase. So right now in Manchester, there's only 274 homes on the market for sale compared to nearly 1,000 homes on the market for sale 6 or 7 years ago. And that shortage is unlikely to be relieved until we see more of an economic downturn take place. We're likely going to have to see some mortgage defaults and foreclosures hit the Manchester and New Hampshire housing market for there to be a meaningful increase in inventory and forced selling. But you'll want to be even more careful if you're a home buyer in our number 8 worst city to buy in 2024, Las Vegas, because Las Vegas is a market that has lots and lots of downside potential. It's one of America's biggest boom or bust housing markets, and actually the bust might have already started, with home prices in Las Vegas down about 5.8% from their peak in the middle of 2022. The typical values declined from $431,000 to $406,000. However, despite these initial declines, you can see home prices in Vegas are still at nearly an all-time high level. And what's got to concern you if you're a Vegas home buyer in 2024 is what happened to this housing market in the last crash, when values dropped by over 60%. Literally, almost every homeowner in Las Vegas went underwater on their mortgage in the last downturn. Lots of people got foreclosed on. And the big problem for Vegas's housing market is the local economy. The local economy in Las Vegas is heavily based on the service industry, and it has fairly low wages and incomes. So anytime there's a housing boom and the prices go way up, the locals, they can't really afford it and things come crashing down. And I have particular concern for the zip codes in dark red here in Las Vegas, because these are ones where home values are as much as 50% overvalued right now in 2024. Overvaluation levels that suggest that prices could go down by a lot. And if you're in Vegas, you got to watch out for those real estate investors, because those investors, they piled into the market, they pushed the prices way up, they caused a lot of overvaluation, and now those investors in Vegas, they're no longer buying. The investor purchases are down as much as 50 to 60% from peak, and I'm even finding examples of investors in Las Vegas selling. And we're going to need to see more of that investor selling in Vegas in 2024 and beyond to bring more inventory and homes for sale to the market, which is ultimately what's needed to unlock bigger price declines than just the modest correction we've seen so far. And if you're someone who's trying to track the market and understand where home prices are heading over the next year, you're going to want to pay attention to those inventory levels for sure, because the inventory is going to tell you the future direction of prices. You know, if you're in a market where the number of homes for sale has spiked up to the highest level in 7 years, that's going to be a signal that prices are more likely to drop. Whereas if you're in a city like Charleston, South Carolina, Carolina, where inventory is still low compared to its long-term norms, that's a signal that prices are likely to remain stable or even keep going up. Which is a great segue to Charleston, South Carolina, is our number 7 worst city to buy a house in America in 2024. Now, Charleston's an area that lots of people are moving into. The inbound migration is crazy, with the metro consistently adding almost 10,000 people a year net due to positive inbound migration. However, lately, those people moving in, they've pushed the home prices up a lot to a level now that the local in Charleston can no longer afford to purchase, with the typical home value in the metro of $422,000 now running over 5 times the median household income of $82,000. And if you go on Zillow and you go to kind of the center of Charleston, you can actually see there's lots of homes on the market for millions and millions of dollars. So this is an area that kind of used to be affordable, but is no longer, which is why, according to data available on Reventure App, Charleston's housing market is about 21% overvalued compared to its long-term norms. And if you see that overvaluation metric above 20%, that's a sign that there could be some price declines into the future. Because if we take a look at Charleston's overvaluation historically, we can see that today is the most overvalued this housing market has ever been, whereas only about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it was actually an undervalued market. In 2019, Charleston was undervalued. Now it's overvalued. And ultimately, if you're a buyer, you would rather buy into the market when it's undervalued, because that means there's more upside potential. And that's a key thing to understand, everyone, is that we are still in the midst of a record housing bubble. You know, while prices have gone down a bit in some cities across America, they're still very, very expensive at a level where if you buy in today, it's really hard to see how there could be more appreciation into the future, because it's gonna take a while for the incomes and the wages of Americans to catch up to how high prices have gone. Now, in our number 6 worst city to buy in 2024, it's not really an area that's tremendously overvalued. More so, it's an area that's just very expensive, with the typical price of a home registering at over $650,000 in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, Boston and its surrounding suburbs have become an extremely frustrating housing market. I mean, folks, there's been multiple points over the last 2 years that I thought maybe Boston's housing market would enter a downturn and there'd be more inventory and homes for sale, but that hasn't unfortunately happened yet. We're still dealing with a major housing shortage in Boston, with only 4,000 homes for sale on the market across this entire metro area, which actually stretches up into New Hampshire and down close to Rhode Island. You can see that's 4,000 homes for sale is actually lower than a year ago and is about 35% below the long-term average, which means that sellers in Boston still have the upper hand. But now, one thing I need to warn you guys about if you're a home buyer and investor is that it's not enough to know about the data in your metro area or in your county. You got to know what this data is saying in your neighborhood so you don't make the wrong decision. For instance, if we go on Reventure App and look at the different zip codes in Boston, we can see prices in urban Boston and Suffolk County have actually been going down over the last 18 months. Prices are dropping, whereas prices are still going up in the outlying suburbs, right? And the reason that there's that differential is because of inventory. Inventory is still way down in the suburbs, but it's actually above average in the city. So it's imperative that you know in your zip code the trend in prices and inventory, because that's going to tell you what's going to happen going forward into 2024 and beyond. One area where I would probably just not buy in general is our number 5 worst city to buy a house in 2024. This is an area, it was a pandemic boom town. The prices went way up. Lots of people moved in, which has now caused Portland, Maine's housing market to spiral out of control. Now, Portland, it's another metro like Manchester that's just north of Boston by about 2 hours. Lots of people moved here during the pandemic, pushing prices up to $493,000 for the typical house in Portland, which you can see is almost double what it was just 6 to 7 years ago. And interestingly, this is a market where prices just really weren't expensive for a long time. Basically from 03, 04, all the way to 2017, prices were very, very low, and now they've skyrocketed up, which has me concerned that this market is in a bit of a bubble, with home prices now 26% overvalued compared to their long-term norms. And I think a lot of you guys need to be careful if you're looking and buying in some of these, let's call them vacation style destinations or second home destinations like up in Maine. These are areas that have a lot of potential downside, because it's pretty easy for someone to decide to sell a second or third house or to just not buy. Because in Portland, over 16% of the houses are in what I call shadow inventory, meaning that they are seasonally vacant. So there's 36,000 houses in shadow inventory inventory compared to 212,000 houses overall. That's a very high rate and suggests that if there's some type of economic downturn or regional economic downturn, we could see a lot of people sell their second and third homes, which could cause the local market to crash. However, until that happens, Portland's housing market is likely to remain stable and ultimately frustrating for home buyers because the inventory levels are still near the lowest level on record, with only 859 houses on the market compared to a long-term average of 1,400 houses. So as a home buyer in Portland or any other city in America, you want to see these inventory levels go closer to the dotted line before it's a good time to buy. And you can track that data, everyone, on Reventure App. www.reventure.app provides data on home values and inventory for every zip code in America for free. However, before you guys go there, let's finish off this list so you guys know the cities where you should probably avoid buying in 2024. Like San Diego, California, our number 4 worst city to buy a house. San Diego, like Los Angeles, is a place where values have just skyrocketed out of control and are super, super expensive, with the typical home value across the San Diego metro registering an astronomical $894,000. Oh, baby! Prices in San Diego are expensive, and you can see they're now going back up. After a brief dip about a year ago, prices in San Diego have turned upward again and are near a record high. And just to give you guys an idea of what homebuyers in San Diego are dealing with, take a look at this listing on Zillow. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath house. It's only 1,200 square feet, and it's on the market for almost $1.1 million. It looks like a flipper bought this house in the middle of June of last year and has since jacked up the price another $300,000. Looks like they actually did some decent renovations. However, this is just such an expensive price for the type of house you're getting. Your monthly payment would be almost $7,000 a month, including mortgage, taxes, and insurance. And ultimately, I don't think those type of costs are sustainable, especially not for a local population who earns a median of about $90,000 a year in income. And it's this lack of affordability that, in my opinion, at some point is going to cause a housing downturn. And in fact, San Diego's housing market has been plagued by several housing downturns in the past, with values crashing by 36% in the housing downturn from 2007 to 2012, prices going down by about 17% from 1990 all the way to 1996. So if we do see an increase in inventory and homes for sale over the next couple years in San Diego, I think we could see another decline in prices. However, for that to happen, we're going to need to see some distress, some forced selling, and more homes hit the market. As is the case in our number 3 worst city to buy a house in America, this is an area plagued by expensive prices, low inventory, as well as lots of overvaluation. I would not want to be a home buyer in Worcester, Massachusetts right now. Moving back across the country to New England, we can see that home prices in Worcester are we can see that the typical home value in Worcester is $425,000, which is significantly cheaper than nearby Boston by about 30%. However, $425,000 is expensive compared to what Worcester used to be, when only a couple years ago you could buy a house there for $280,000. And when you see such a sharp increase in values in such a short period of time that goes way beyond what the increase in incomes was, that's typically the sign of a bubble occurring in the market. However, for that bubble in Worcester to pop, we're going to need to see more inventory, with the current inventory levels a massive 42% below the long-term average. Right now there's 655 homes for sale. Normally there's 1,100 homes for sale. So we're going to need to see that inventory deficit close before it becomes a better time to buy in Worcester. Now folks, are you ready for our top 2 worst cities to buy a house in 2024? I would not want to be a home buyer in these areas. I think if you do buy a house in these areas, you could end up regretting it. You might end up house poor. You might end up hating the house you buy because there's so few homes to choose from. You might end up selling at a loss in a couple years if you buy in our number 2 worst city to buy a house in America right now, Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville has been a very popular city for people to move to over the last 3 to 4 years, especially since the pandemic hit. Lots of people from the Northeast moving down to this bohemian hipster destination on the west side of North Carolina, where the typical value of a house is now $416,000, which again is almost double what it was 6 to 7 years ago. And you can see for a long time, Asheville didn't really appreciate. It kind of stayed steady. Then over the last couple years, it exploded in value. However, the median household income is still only $68,000 for those that live in Asheville, meaning that there's not a lot lot of people who have the money to buy a 3-bed, 1-bath house that's 1,200 square feet for $650,000. I mean, take a look at this, everyone. This house in Asheville, it's old, it isn't renovated. The kitchen appliances look like they're from the 1970s. If you were to buy this house with a mortgage, your payment would be almost $3,900 a month, which is more than 60% of the local median household income. And Asheville is another market where there's lots of second home buyers, lots of second and third home buyers who don't live in the homes full time, lots of houses sitting vacant, with shadow inventory measuring 10% of the entire housing stock, which is about 5 times the US average, meaning that if there's ever a local economic downturn in this area, we could see a lot of forced selling of homes, which could push prices in Asheville down. However, for now, the inventory levels are still fairly low, with prices remaining high, meaning it's a bad time to purchase. And before getting into our number one worst city to buy a house, everyone, I'm letting you know that if you're a home buyer investor who wants to understand your housing market better and where home prices could be heading in 2024, I'd encourage you, go to Reventure App, www.reventure.app, where you can type in your city or zip code and immediately start analyzing the local housing market in terms of home values, overvaluation levels, inventory trends, seller price cuts, days on the market, as well as premium data points like population and income growth. Understanding these metrics is going to help you make a better decision about when and where to buy a house. To get started, start with looking at home value and inventory data, and from there upgrade to a premium membership for $39 a month, where you can access overvaluation levels, seller price cuts, and see how much values have changed since the peak of the bubble in mid-2022. Before that, let's talk about our number one worst city to buy a house in America. This is a place where prices have gone up a lot over the last 2 or 3 years, and the reason the prices have gone up a lot is because there is an epic shortage of homes for sale. I have never actually seen a housing market with so little inventory and so little homes for sale before. You can actually see today there's only 1,000 homes for sale in this market compared to nearly 5,000 before the pandemic. So the inventory levels are down almost 80%, and the home prices, they've gone way up and are really expensive in the Stamford, Connecticut metro area. Basically comprises the entirety of Fairfield County in Connecticut. You can see the typical home value here is up to $589,000. Lots of people escaped New York during the pandemic and bought homes up in Fairfield County, with the result being a very tight housing market where only 4.9% of sellers are cutting the price and where home values are still up 9% over the last year. To access that data for yourself and to find out how much home prices have gone up in your city over the last year, go to www.reventure.app right now.